there's one question there from an anonymous attendee. I think that's really, really important. I just wanted to highlight so that to give everyone the freedom to really post any questions from now until the Q&A session, and to not feel the restriction of being judged or being identified. So then without further ado, we'll move on to our next speaker. It's with great pleasure I introduce Thomas Rigotti, who is a professor of industrial, organizational and economic psychology, if that's correct, at the Johannes Gutenberg University Mainz. He's written about a very broad range of issues associated with resilience and leadership in the environment of employment, including things like gender roles, time and performance pressure, job insecurities, and also abusive supervision. So now I'd like to hand over to Thomas. Thank you very much.
Yeah, hello, and many thanks for the invitation. Thanks for having me. I'm still a freshman in the Leibniz community, so I'm quite excited to get invited to this group, the Resilience, the now called Leibniz Institute for Resilience Research in Mainz, just joined the Leibniz community this January 2020. I also prepared a few slides, and I try to share them now. Let me see, okay. I hope you can see them now. I actually won't talk too much about leadership, but still I hope I can meet some of your expectations, because that's also a topic of, of my talk. And I try to connect the first webinar with my talk by starting with the topic about stress and health and mental health in academia. There are numerous reports in different journals about high workload, high insecurity, and especially high prevalence rates of mental health, especially in the group among PhD students. This is a study from Flanders, and they compared certain items which indicate kind of depressive symptoms of PhD students with a group of highly educated general population. And I won't go to every single item, but you see that PhD students constantly report higher values concerning things like I felt under constant strain, I was unhappy and depressed in a certain time frame, I lost sleep over worry, and so on. And the differences are quite strong here. Well, in general, mental disorders are common in the general population. If you look at lifetime prevalences of mental health issues, then it's at least 1/3 in the population that will have a mental problem during the lifetime. And graduate students and academic trainees appear to be at increased risk for mental health. And these are not diagnosed health issues, but self-reports, of course. But you see that we can find quite high prevalence rates here in another study among more than 2,000 PhD candidates worldwide in different countries. And in one of those studies, they also looked at like the reasons. What are the drivers for this picture? And as you see, there's a lot in it which concerns the relationship with the PhD supervisor. So provides mentorship, provides ample support, gives me positive emotional impact, is an asset to my career, or I feel valued by the mentor. And you see these are the percentages that said, well, yes, certain items which indicate depressive symptoms, I tick them on yes or no, and you see that there's a huge impact of the relationship to the PhD supervisor for well-being and the mental health. And of course, in addition, Claudia also talked about it, you have the career insecurity, you have the job insecurity, and you have often high time pressure, high performance pressure, and not all expectations are clear from the beginning, probably. I really love this this sentence because it's so simple, but it really captures the core of stress. Stress has to do with the anticipated or experienced thwarting of goals. So it's whenever you have a goal, and that's what we have all day long, actually, because otherwise we could not consciously take actions. And the goal is, of course, to reach your PhD, but you have smaller goals during the day, like finishing a chapter or anything, or writing or reading a journal article, and you get constantly interrupted by others. For instance, this is like thwarting your goal to finish this this task on hand. And also on the broader spectrum, anything that gets in the way to get your goals done, that causes stress. And this is a very simple but nice way to look at the problem, actually, and really to think about, okay, what are those things that are in my way? What are the obstacles that are in my way, and how can I deal with them? There's a relatively new concept in work psychology called stress as offense to self. This concept, also by Norbert Semmer and group in Switzerland, says that stress is also at the core of self-esteem, actually. And there are two two sources, self-evaluation and the evaluation by others, which can cause that you feel insufficient in a way or not treated nicely. So self-evaluation means you have the feeling that you can't catch up with the expectations, that you don't show the performance that you would like to show. Especially if you start with a PhD, you might think, am I good enough? Will I really manage to do this? There are so many brilliant people around here. And maybe if you're in the system a while, you see that most of the people also cook with water. Then there's the stress as disrespect, evaluation by others. And this is like connected to abusive leadership, but also to peer behavior, interpersonal behavior. The question, if others treat me with respect, and it's also about task assignment by leaders, for example. Do they give me, does the leader, the supervisor, give me tasks that are reasonable and that are in my range of my qualification, for example, or not? And there's ample evidence that these kinds of illegitimate tasks are related to lower self-esteem, higher burnout, even to higher cortisol levels, and to poorer sleep quality. I won't go into the picture, it's just from one study where we showed that it's also important. Just a short note about abusive supervision. I won't talk too much about leadership actually here, but this, of course, is a topic which goes through the different things. Abusive supervision can be defined as the subordinate's perception of the extent to which the supervisors engage in the prolonged display of non-physical hostile verbal and non-verbal behaviors, such as public ridiculing and belittling, taking credit for subordinates' work, giving subordinates the silent treatment, and invading subordinates' privacy. And this has been shown to be related to reduced job satisfaction, increased turnover intention, reduced well-being and performance. And what's interesting, what are the drivers? Of course, personality. Claudia already talked about it a little bit, but actually in a recent meta-analysis, the strongest predictors for the likelihood in an organization to have abusive supervision were organizational sanctions, of course negatively related, and organizational climate. So you can take measures on the organizational level to prevent leaders from being abusive. And this is, I think, an important message. And also about thinking the personality of my leader. What are the motivational factors? And there's one thing what we know, that there's an increased likelihood of becoming a leader or getting into leadership position if you are narcissistic. So on average, it is that leaders are a bit more narcissistic than people without leadership positions. And there are two forms of narcissism: grandiose, feeling superior, arrogance, search for admiration, lack of empathy, and the vulnerable narcissism, which is more an unstable self-esteem, dependent on others. And in some own research, we could also show that leaders report higher grandiose narcissism, employees higher values in vulnerable narcissism, on average, of course. And what's interesting about grandiose narcissism is that it's a kind of a resilient factor for the individual. It's negatively related to emotional exhaustion, for example. Grandiose narcissists, well, nothing can get in their way. They're in the middle of everything. So that's kind of a resilient factor for them, but not for others around them, actually. And what we looked at is what is if these